The Galactic Empire, sprawling across the cosmos with its countless fleets and advanced technology, had never encountered resistance quite like this. They had faced rebellions, crushed insurgencies, and subdued entire star systems under their iron fist. Victory was the Empire's birthright, or so they believed. Their latest conquest had brought them to a blue-green planet orbiting a modest star, Earth. From orbit, Earth seemed unremarkable. Its technology was primitive compared to the Empire's warp drives and plasma cannons. Its defenses were laughable. Yet, the humans had something the Empire underestimated, an indomitable spirit. The invasion began as expected. Imperial dreadnoughts darkened the skies, their shadow swallowing cities whole. The Empire's legions marched upon every major capital, subduing resistance with ease. Nations fell within weeks, their leaders brought to kneel before the Empire's emissaries. By all accounts, the Empire had won. But then came the human diplomat. Her name was Dr. Elena Morgan. She was no soldier, no warrior. She wore no armor, carried no weapons, and commanded no armies. Yet, when she walked into the Empire's command center in what was left of Geneva, there was a quiet confidence about her that unsettled the Imperial officers. Grand Admiral Tarvok, a towering figure clad in obsidian armor, greeted her with a sneer. So, the humans finally send someone to grovel. How quaint. Dr. Morgan's gaze was steady. I'm not here to grovel, Admiral. I'm here to negotiate. Tarvok laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber. Negotiate? Your planet is ours. Your people are subjugated. What could you possibly offer us? Perspective, she replied. Her calm demeanor was disarming. And perhaps a warning. Tarvok's amusement faded. A warning? Dr. Morgan stepped closer, unflinching despite the armed guards flanking her. Rule number 1 when dealing with humanity, Admiral, never mistake quiet for submission. The room fell silent. The phrase hung in the air, enigmatic and foreboding. Tarvok narrowed his eyes. What are you implying? Morgan's lips curled into a faint smile. Your empire is vast, Admiral, but you've spread yourselves thin. Your conquests rely on fear and brute force, but humanity thrives on adversity. We don't break, we adapt. And while you've been busy counting your victories, we've been preparing. Tarvok leaned forward, his voice a growl. Preparing for what? Morgan's gaze didn't waver. For you to underestimate us. At that moment, alarms blared through the command center. Tarvok's second-in-command, Captain Relvar, rushed to a console. Admiral, we're detecting multiple breaches across the fleet. Internal systems are being compromised. Impossible. Tarvok barked. Our security protocols are impenetrable. Dr. Morgan's smile widened slightly. They were. Until we figured out how to bypass them. Tarvok turned to her, fury blazing in his eyes. What have you done? We've shown you what happens when you underestimate humans, she replied. While you've been gloating over your supposed victory, our brightest minds have been working tirelessly to turn the tide. Your ships, your weapons, your entire infrastructure, it's vulnerable. And now, it's ours. As if on cue, reports flooded in. Entire fleets were going dark. Imperial weapons turned on their own troops. Supply lines were severed. Chaos spread like wildfire. This is a trick, Tarvok snarled. A desperate bluff. Morgan's expression hardened. It's not a bluff, Admiral. It's a demonstration. You thought you'd won because you conquered our cities. But humanity isn't defined by its buildings or its borders. It's defined by its people. And we're far from defeated. Tarvok's fists clenched. You think this will stop us? The Empire is eternal. We will rebuild, stronger than before. Morgan's gaze bore into him. Then you'll learn rule number 2, humanity doesn't just fight back. We learn. And we don't make the same mistake twice. The battle for Earth had taken a turn the Empire never anticipated. What they saw as a primitive backwater had become their greatest challenge. And as their fleets crumbled and their soldiers faltered, one truth became undeniable: they had underestimated humanity. And humanity never forgot. The command center erupted into chaos. Tarvok's officers scrambled, shouting orders and desperately trying to regain control of their systems. The screens that had once displayed the Empire's dominance now flickered with static and the emblem of humanity, a single, defiant star encircled by a ring of unity. Tarvok's fury was palpable. "This changes nothing," he roared, slamming his fist onto the console. "We will crush this rebellion, just as we have crushed every other." Dr. Morgan remained calm, her hands clasped in front of her. "You don't understand, Admiral. This isn't a rebellion. It's a reckoning." Before Tarvok could respond, an explosion rocked the command center. The room shook violently, and sparks flew from damaged equipment. A nearby officer shouted, "Admiral! The humans have boarded the flagship. They're inside the core." Tarvok's face darkened. "Impossible. No one can breach." "They just did," Morgan interrupted, her voice steady. "Rule number 3, Admiral, never underestimate what humanity is willing to sacrifice for freedom." On cue, a hologram blinked to life in the center of the room. It showed a team of human operatives deep within the heart of Tarvok's flagship. Their leader, a grim-faced man with a scar running across his cheek, held up a device brimming with energy. It was a prototype bomb, one designed specifically to disrupt the Empire's advanced technology. The man looked directly into the hologram. "This is Captain Elias Vega, Earth Resistance. Stand down, or we detonate." Tarvok's hands trembled with rage, but he couldn't ignore the reports flooding in. The bomb was real, and its detonation wouldn't just cripple the flagship, it would send a cascading pulse through the Empire's entire fleet, leaving them vulnerable to attack. "You're bluffing," Tarvok spat, though his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. Dr. Morgan stepped forward. "Do you really want to test that theory? Humanity has everything to lose and everything to gain. But you, Admiral, your empire has never faced a true existential threat. You don't know what it means to fight for survival." The room fell silent again, save for the hum of failing systems. Tarvok's officers exchanged nervous glances, their confidence wavering. For the first time in his long and decorated career, the Grand Admiral felt the cold grip of uncertainty. "You can retreat," Morgan continued, her tone unyielding. "Take your ships, leave Earth, and never return. Or you can stay and watch your empire burn, starting here, starting now." Tarvok's jaw clenched so tightly it seemed as though he might shatter his teeth. He turned to his second-in-command. "Order the fleet to." "Admiral." Captain Relvar interrupted, panic in her voice. "New contacts on the scanners. Hundreds of them." The holographic display shifted, showing a massive fleet emerging from hyperspace. But these weren't Imperial ships. They were a coalition of vessels, cobbled together from dozens of species the Empire had oppressed over the centuries. Each bore the mark of rebellion, defiance, and hope. Morgan's smile returned. "Ah, right on time. You didn't think we were fighting alone, did you? Turns out, your empire has made a lot of enemies. And we humans? We're pretty good at making friends." Tarvok's face went pale as the realization set in. This wasn't just a resistance. It was a revolution. The galaxy itself was rising against the Empire, and Earth had become the spark that lit the fire. "You've already lost, Admiral," Morgan said softly. "The only question left is how much you're willing to lose before you accept it." For a long moment, Tarvok said nothing. The weight of the situation bore down on him, heavier than any armor he'd ever worn. Finally, with a guttural growl, he turned to his officers. "Order the retreat." The words felt like ash on his tongue, but there was no other choice. Alarms continued to blare as the Empire's forces began to pull back, their once mighty fleet retreating in disarray. As the flagship prepared to jump to hyperspace, Tarvok cast one last look at Morgan. "This isn't over." Morgan's gaze was unyielding. "It is for now. And that's all we need." With a final snarl, Tarvok turned away. The Empire's ships vanished into the void, leaving Earth scarred but unbroken. Cheers erupted across the planet as humanity and its newfound allies celebrated a victory that had once seemed impossible. Dr. Morgan stood on the ruins of Geneva, gazing up at the stars. The cost had been high, and the battle far from over, but for the first time, there was hope. Humanity had not just survived, it had ignited a movement that would echo across the galaxy. And as the stars shimmered above, Morgan whispered to herself, "Rule number 4, never underestimate the power of unity." As the last remnants of the Empire's fleet vanished into the depths of hyperspace, the skies above Earth began to clear. The battle that had raged across the globe, shaking cities to their core, was finally over. Humanity had secured a victory that no one had thought possible. But for Dr. Morgan, there was no time for celebration. The victory was only the beginning. The Empire was not simply going to retreat and fade away. Tarvok's words, "This isn't over," still echoed in her mind. She turned away from the ruins of Geneva, where the last remnants of the Empire's grasp on Earth had crumbled. Behind her, the survivors and rebels were beginning to regroup, rallying to rebuild what had been lost. But she knew that this peace would be fragile. The galaxy was a vast and untamed place, and as the rebellion spread, so too would the forces of the Empire, seeking to reclaim its control. But Morgan also knew that humanity's unity, born from years of struggle and sacrifice, had forged something powerful, something that could never be undone. "We can do this," she muttered under her breath, a quiet promise to herself. In the distance, the first ships of the liberated coalition began to land, their crews stepping out onto the soil of Earth. Many of them were former enemies of the Empire, species that had suffered under its reign. They were allies now, bound together by the same goal, to ensure that the Empire would never rise again. Dr. Morgan knew what had to be done. The first steps of the revolution had been taken, but the journey was far from complete. The road ahead would be long, fraught with dangers, betrayals, and battles that would test every ounce of humanity's resolve. She stepped forward, resolute and unyielding. Rule number 5, never stop fighting for the future. With that, she joined the ranks of the soldiers, scientists, and civilians who had come together to rebuild a world on the brink of change. Together, they would forge a new future, one where freedom, unity, and hope were not just ideals, but the foundation of the galaxy's future. As the last of the Imperial fleet disappeared beyond the horizon, humanity, along with its allies, stood tall, ready to defend the galaxy from the shadows that still loomed. And somewhere among the stars, the embers of rebellion continued to burn, waiting for the moment to strike again. This was not the end. It was only the beginning.